Grace's story. The shadow in the mirror. Moving into my first home was supposed to be a milestone, a symbol of independence and a fresh start. The small suburban house with its charming garden and cozy rooms seemed perfect. I was overjoyed, feeling a sense of pride as I unpacked my boxes and arranged my furniture. Little did I know, my excitement would soon turn to terror. The first night in my new home was uneventful. I settled into my routine quickly, savoring the peace and quiet. However, it wasn't long before strange things began to happen. It started subtly. A flicker of light here, a strange noise there, but I brushed it off as the usual quirks of an old house. It was a few nights later when I first saw the shadow in the mirror. I had just finished brushing my teeth and was about to turn off the bathroom light when I noticed a dark shape behind me in the mirror. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. I laughed it off, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light, or perhaps my imagination running wild. But the shadow persisted. Every night, as I stood in front of the mirror, it would appear, sometimes faint, sometimes more distinct. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just a play of shadows from the hallway light. But deep down I felt a growing unease. One night, the figure was clearer than ever before. I could make out the shape of a tall, shadowy man, standing just behind me. My blood ran cold, and I quickly turned off the light, plunging the bathroom into darkness. My reflection disappeared, and so did the shadow. I started to dread looking into mirrors. I would avoid the bathroom at night and hurriedly glance at my reflection in the morning, hoping not to see the ominous figure. But soon, the shadow began to appear in other reflective surfaces around the house. The windows, the TV screen, even the glass of picture frames, it was everywhere. Each time it seemed to be getting closer, the sense of foreboding growing stronger. Sleep became elusive. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every sound. My once cozy home had become a place of fear. I confided in my friends, but they dismissed my experiences, attributing them to stress or an overactive imagination. I began to doubt my sanity. One evening, as I was cleaning the living room, I noticed the shadow in the reflection of a framed photo. It was right behind me, so close I could almost feel its cold presence. Panic surged through me, and I knocked the frame over, shattering the glass. My hands trembled as I picked up the pieces, my mind racing with fear. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to cover all the mirrors in my house and avoid reflective surfaces altogether. I draped cloths over the bathroom mirror, the windows, and even the TV screen. It felt like a desperate measure, but I was willing to try anything to escape the relentless terror. For a while it seemed to work. The house felt less oppressive, and I began to regain a sense of normalcy. I still felt uneasy, but without the constant sightings of the shadowy figure, I could at least function. I even started to attend a support group for people who had experienced paranormal events, hoping to find solace and understanding. Sharing my story with the group was cathartic. They listened with empathy, their own experiences echoing my fears. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had survived my ordeal. One evening, after a particularly supportive group session, I sat in a cozy coffee shop with a few members, recounting my story in more detail. The warm atmosphere and the comforting chatter of the patrons made me feel safe for the first time in weeks. I reached for my coffee cup, the steam curling into the air, and glanced at the table's surface. My heart skipped a beat. There, in the reflection of my coffee cup, was the shadowy figure. It was closer than ever, looming behind me, almost touching. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure moved slightly, its shape becoming more defined. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let the others see my fear. "Are you okay, Grace?" one of the group members asked, noticing my sudden silence. I forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just lost in thought." The conversation continued around me, but I couldn't focus. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. I kept stealing glances at the coffee cup, hoping the shadow would disappear. But it remained, a constant, terrifying presence. I left the coffee shop in a daze, the realization dawning on me that my ordeal was far from over. The shadow hadn't been banished. It was still with me, lurking just out of sight, waiting for its moment. Back in my house, the atmosphere felt even more oppressive. The covered mirrors and draped windows did little to alleviate my fear. I knew now that the shadow wasn't confined to reflective surfaces. It was part of my life, entwined with my very being. I tried to go about my daily routine, but the constant fear was exhausting. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light set my nerves on edge. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, trapped by a malevolent presence that refused to leave. Desperation drove me to seek out more information. I scoured the internet, searching for stories similar to mine, hoping to find a solution. I read about ancient rituals, protective charms, and exorcisms, but nothing seemed to fit my situation. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a cold breeze brush against my face. I opened my eyes to see the shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed, more solid than ever before. It reached out a hand, and I felt a chilling touch on my ankle. I screamed, scrambling out of bed and fumbling for the light switch. The room was bathed in harsh light, and the shadow disappeared. But the fear remained, a gnawing dread that refused to let go. I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I packed a bag and left, driving to a friend's place in the middle of the night. I told them everything and they offered me a place to stay. But even there the shadow followed me. I saw it in the reflection of the kitchen window, in the dark screen of the TV. It was always there, always watching. I returned to my house to gather more belongings, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. As I walked through the door, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The house was silent, oppressive. I moved out, leaving the house behind. But the shadow remained a constant presence in my life, a reminder of the terror I had faced. I couldn't escape it, no matter how far I ran. As I sit here, sharing my story with a support group, I can see the shadow in the reflection of my coffee cup. It's closer now, almost touching my shoulder. I know that my ordeal is far from over, that the shadow will never truly leave me. But I also know that I'm not alone. The support group listens with empathy, their own experiences echoing my fears. Together we face our demons, finding strength in each other's stories. I know now that the shadow is a part of me, a dark reflection of my fears and my past. But I also know that I can survive, that I can find strength in the face of terror. As I leave the support group, I feel a cold breeze brush against my face. I turn, but the shadow is gone. For now. But I know it will be back. And when it does, I'll be ready. The reflection in my coffee cup was just the beginning. The shadow in the mirror is always there, lurking just out of sight, waiting for its moment. And as long as I live, I will never truly be free.
The Haunting of Whispering Woods. When I think back to that fateful camping trip in Whispering Woods, a chill runs down my spine. It's been years since that night, but the memories are as vivid as ever. The friends I lost, the terror we faced, and the dark entity that stalked us, these are the things that haunt my every waking moment. My name is Daniel, and this is my story. We were a group of 5, me, Ralph, Alice, Jen, and Tom. We had been planning a camping trip for months, eager to escape the city and reconnect with nature. Whispering Woods was our chosen destination, a remote forest with a reputation for eerie folklore. Stories of ghostly whispers and glowing eyes in the darkness intrigued us more than they scared us. We were young and fearless, or so we thought. The drive to the woods was filled with laughter and anticipation. We arrived at the edge of the forest just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the trees. The air was cool and crisp, and the forest seemed to welcome us with open arms. We set up camp in a small clearing, the flickering light of our campfire dancing off the surrounding trees. As night fell, we sat around the fire, sharing ghost stories and roasting marshmallows. The fire crackled, and the shadows grew deeper. It was then that we first heard the whispers, soft, barely audible, like the wind rustling through the leaves. "Did you hear that?" Alice asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Probably just the wind," Tom replied, trying to sound brave. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more distinct. We exchanged uneasy glances, the stories we had heard about Whispering Woods suddenly feeling all too real. "Maybe we should turn in for the night," Jen suggested, her voice trembling slightly. We agreed, each of us retreating to our tents. I lay awake, listening to the whispers outside. They seemed to come from all directions, surrounding us. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a blood-curdling scream. I scrambled out of my tent, heart pounding. The campfire had died down, casting everything in an eerie, dim light. Ralph was gone. His tent was empty, his belongings scattered. "Ralph!" I called out, my voice echoing through the silent woods. There was no response, only the whispers, now louder and more insistent. We searched for him, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. But there was no sign of Ralph, only the oppressive feeling of being watched. It was as if the forest itself was alive, breathing down our necks. As dawn broke, we gathered around the remains of the campfire, exhausted and terrified. We had no idea what had happened to Ralph, and fear hung heavy in the air. We debated whether to stay and continue searching or to pack up and leave. "We can't just leave him," Alice said, her eyes filled with tears. "We need to get out of here," Tom argued. "Something is out there, and it's picking us off one by one." Reluctantly, we decided to stay one more day, hoping to find some trace of Ralph. But as the day wore on, the whispers grew louder, and the sense of dread intensified. That night, we huddled together around the fire, too scared to sleep. In the middle of the night, Jen vanished. One moment she was there, clutching my hand, and the next, she was gone. The whispers had grown into a cacophony, and the glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, watching us. Panic set in, and we decided to leave immediately. But the forest had other plans. No matter which direction we went, we always ended up back at our campsite. It was as if the woods were toying with us, trapping us in a nightmarish loop. One by one, my friends disappeared, taken by the unseen entity that haunted the forest. I was the last one left, alone and terrified. The whispers were deafening now, and the glowing eyes were everywhere. I could feel the entity closing in, its malevolent presence suffocating. For days, I wandered the forest, hunted by the unseen force. I barely slept, barely ate, my body and mind pushed to their limits. I felt like a prey animal, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the end. And then, just as I was about to give up hope, I found a path. It was faint, overgrown, but it led me out of the forest. I stumbled onto a road, collapsing in exhaustion. A passing motorist found me and took me to the hospital. I was the only one who made it out of Whispering Woods. The official story was that my friends got lost and were never found. But I knew the truth. The forest had taken them, claimed them as its own. The entity that haunted those woods was real, and it had let me go, but not without leaving its mark. I thought I had escaped the terror of Whispering Woods. I tried to move on, to put the past behind me. But the memories never faded. The whispers still echoed in my mind, and the feeling of being watched never left me. I couldn't shake the sense that the entity was still with me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was a few years later when I realized the true extent of what had happened. I was sharing my story at a support group for trauma survivors, hoping to find some solace. As I spoke, I noticed the expressions of the others in the room. They seemed genuinely sympathetic, but there was also something else, an undercurrent of disbelief. After the meeting, one of the group members approached me. His name was David, and he had a calm, reassuring presence. "I believe you, Daniel," he said. "I've experienced something similar." I was desperate for answers, so I agreed to meet with him privately. We talked late into the night, sharing our stories. David explained that he had also encountered a malevolent force in the woods, but he had found a way to defeat it. "It's not enough to escape physically," he said. "You have to break its hold on your mind." David taught me a ritual, a way to cleanse myself of the entity's influence. It was a long and arduous process, but I was determined to rid myself of the darkness that had plagued me for so long. I performed the ritual with David's guidance, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. The whispers stopped, and the feeling of being watched faded. I finally felt free. But the scars remained. I had lost my friends, and the guilt weighed heavily on me. I couldn't forgive myself for surviving when they hadn't. I tried to move on, but the memories of that night in Whispering Woods haunted me. One evening, I decided to visit the forest again. I needed closure, a way to say goodbye to my friends. As I walked through the woods, I felt a sense of calm. The forest was quiet, peaceful. It was hard to believe it was the same place that had caused so much pain. I found the clearing where we had camped, now overgrown with vegetation. I stood there for a long time, remembering my friends and the good times we had shared. I whispered a final farewell and turned to leave. As I walked away, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, expecting to see the entity, but there was nothing there. Just the forest, silent and serene. I knew then that the thing was truly defeated. It no longer had a hold on me. But the experience had changed me forever. I would always carry the memories of that night, the fear, the loss. They were a part of me now, just as Whispering Woods would always be a part of my story. I share my tale not to frighten, but to warn. There are places in this world that hold darkness, places that can reach into your soul and leave a mark that never fades. If you ever find yourself in Whispering Woods, remember my story. Be cautious, be aware, and never underestimate the power of the unknown. And if you hear the whispers, turn back. Don't look for the glowing eyes in the darkness. Some things are better left unseen. I left Whispering Woods that day, finally at peace. But every now and then, in the quiet of the night, I still hear the faintest whisper, a reminder of the terror I faced and the friends I lost. And I know that while the entity may be gone, the memories will haunt me forever.
The Dolls of Ravenswood Orphanage. Evelyn sat in her dimly lit living room, her eyes distant as she recounted her tale to a group of intrigued listeners. The flickering light from the fireplace cast eerie shadows on the walls, adding to the atmosphere of suspense. She took a deep breath, her voice steady but laden with memories that still haunted her. It was many years ago, Evelyn began, when I was just a child living at Ravenswood Orphanage. The place was old and decrepit, with creaking floors and drafty windows. It always felt cold, no matter the season. But it wasn't just the physical state of the orphanage that was unsettling, it was the dolls in the attic. The listeners leaned in closer, captivated by her story. Ravenswood had a vast, dusty attic filled with old furniture, trunks of forgotten belongings, and most disturbingly dolls. Hundreds of them, all sizes and shapes, with glassy eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you went. During the day, they were just eerie relics of the past, but at night, they became something else entirely. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she continued. The first time I heard the whispers, I thought it was my imagination. I was lying in bed, the rain tapping against the window, when I heard soft, unintelligible murmurs coming from above. I tried to ignore it, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She paused, her gaze shifting to the window as if expecting to see the rain-soaked orphanage materialize out of the darkness. The next morning, I told some of the other children, but they only looked at me with fear in their eyes. They had heard the whispers too. And worse, they had seen the dolls move. It started with small things, an arm raised, a head tilted. But soon, the dolls were appearing in different places than where we had left them. Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. One by one, children began to disappear. It was always the same. They would go to bed, and by morning, their beds would be empty. The adults claimed they had been adopted or transferred, but we knew the truth. The dolls were taking them. The room was silent, the crackling fire the only sound as Evelyn's listeners hung on her every word. I knew I had to escape, as she said, her voice filled with determination. One stormy night, when the whispers were at their loudest, I made my move. I packed a small bag and crept through the darkened halls, my heart pounding in my chest. As I passed the attic door, I felt a chill run down my spine. The door was ajar, and I could see the faint glow of candlelight inside. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears as she recalled the terror of that night. I peered inside and saw them, the dolls gathered in a circle, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. In the center of the circle was one of the missing children, motionless and pale. I stifled a scream and ran, the doll's whispers following me down the stairs and out into the stormy night. She paused, taking a sip of water to steady herself. I never looked back. I ran until my legs gave out, and by some miracle, I was found by a passing traveler who took me to safety. I vowed never to return to Ravenswood Orphanage. The listeners sat in stunned silence, the horror of Evelyn's story sinking in. She glanced around the room, her eyes settling on a small, dusty shelf behind her. But there's one thing I never told anyone, as she said, her voice barely above a whisper. In my panic that night, I grabbed one of the dolls. I don't know why, perhaps I wanted proof of what I had seen, or maybe I thought I could keep it from harming anyone else. I've kept it all these years, as a reminder of what I survived. She pointed to the shelf, and the listeners turned to see a porcelain doll sitting innocuously among other trinkets. Its dress was tattered, and its eyes were half closed. For a moment, Nothing happened. Then, as if sensing the attention, the doll slowly turned its head and opened its eyes, revealing a malevolent glint. A collective gasp filled the room as Evelyn turned back to her listeners, her face pale. I thought I had left the evil behind, but it seems it never really left me. It has been with me all along, waiting for the right moment to strike. The doll's eyes gleamed with a sinister light, and a faint whisper seemed to emanate from its direction, sending chills down everyone's spine. Evelyn's tale of survival had transformed into a horrifying realization. The evil of Ravenswood Orphanage had followed her, lurking in the shadows, biding its time. The room was plunged into an uneasy silence, the flickering fire casting dancing shadows that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. Evelyn's listeners sat frozen in their seats, their eyes darting between her and the doll on the shelf. The atmosphere was thick with fear and anticipation, as if the room itself had absorbed the malevolent energy of the doll. Evelyn stood up slowly, her legs trembling. She approached the shelf, the distance between her and the doll feeling like an insurmountable chasm. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum. As she reached out a hand to pick up the doll, the whispers grew louder, filling her mind with dark thoughts and memories of the orphanage. Please, as she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Leave me alone." The doll's eyes seemed to glow brighter, and for a moment, Evelyn felt a wave of despair wash over her. But then, a new strength surged within her, a determination to end the nightmare once and for all. With a trembling hand, she grabbed the doll and held it up, its cold porcelain sending a shiver down her spine. The room seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. The whispers reached a crescendo, a cacophony of malevolent voices that threatened to overwhelm her. But Evelyn stood her ground, her grip on the doll tightening. I will not be your victim," as she said through gritted teeth. You will not control me." Summoning every ounce of her strength, Evelyn hurled the doll into the fireplace. The room was filled with an ear-piercing screech as the porcelain cracked and shattered in the flames. The whispers grew louder for a moment, then faded into nothingness. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the room was filled with an eerie silence. Evelyn collapsed to the floor, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief. The listeners rushed to her side, their fear replaced with concern and admiration. They helped her to a chair, offering words of comfort and support. As the fire crackled and consumed the remnants of the doll, Evelyn felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The dark presence that had haunted her since her childhood was finally gone, its power broken. She knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but she was no longer alone. She had faced her fears and emerged victorious, stronger than ever before. Evelyn's story had come to an end, but her resilience and courage would inspire others to confront their own demons. The haunting of Ravenswood Orphanage had left its mark on her, but it had also shaped her into a survivor, a beacon of hope for those who had faced the darkness and come out the other side. As the night wore on and the fire burned low, Evelyn and her listeners shared stories of hope and healing, finding solace in each other's company. The evil of Ravenswood Orphanage was no more, and the shadows that had once loomed large had been banished by the light of courage and determination.